Good morning, beautiful people. I'm glad to be doing this HR weather segment live with you. Although I do think this segment might not be popular because I'm going to be making the argument that bring your whole self to work is probably a bad idea. Sure, the concept sounds great, but in practice, not so much. And I'm sure there's companies that want employees to feel they can bring their whole authentic self to the workplace, but the reality is a lot more complicated. Bring your whole self to work would mean that you're supposed to be completely unfiltered. Let's be real. I don't think any of us want that. I don't think anyone wants to see your weird quirks or habits. And we've all had that coworker that shares way too much. So, how about we do this? How about we bring our professional self to work? Let's not forget that work is still a hierarchy, still a place to get work done. And even if the company invites your whole self, there's a really fine line. I think if you really want to bring your whole self to work, you just have to work for yourself. So that's the HR weather. I'm really interested to hear what the panel has to say about bring your whole self to work. Back to you guys.
Ooh.
Danielle, take
Joel.
this one first.
No, Joel, you are the realist recruiter. You got to tell us how real we could actually be.
No, look, I talk about this a lot with my content, and I've had a ton of videos go viral with this. There's definitely two people that we need to think about when I think about work. You've got your professional self, like you said, Serge, and then you have like the
Yeah.
real you. You definitely do not want to bring the real you. I don't, and I think this is
No.
actually an employer branding thing that has just gotten out of control. Like employer brand is all about, hey, let's try and make our environment look as amazing as possible. Everybody's a fit, everything, and it's nonsense. Okay, not everybody fits in every organization. You cannot be your whole self, your true self at work, okay? It's I don't know where this stuff came from. It's almost like when people say, "Well, you should only work a job that you feel 100% passionate about." Okay, that's great in fantasy land. In real world, sometimes you got to do jobs that suck. So, to me, I think the only reason I feel so passionate about this is because I fell to this mistake. I was my real
Yeah.
self in a number of places, and I got coached out of the organization. I got put on the naughty list because I told people too much of what I thought. Okay. They don't hire you to tell you what you think or like what you feel. They hire you to be a good employee and do what you're told.
Mm.
Amen, brother. Amen.
It's
No,
grim.
and,
Hot
It's
and
grim,
takes.
but
honestly,
it's real.
yeah, I think it's real, and I've seen that in your content. And you've said you're unemployable because of it. And again, you are your real self, but you work for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you've never been as true to who Joel is as you are now doing your
One
own thing.
one place I
And
worked, they said that I was the easiest person to work with, and that was when I knew I
okay,
wasn't being myself because I've been told multiple
Mm.
times I'm not easy to work with. I'm opinionated, I'm a strong thinker, I say what I think. It's not easy for people to work with, right? It's just being real.
yeah. Well, I think we've been giving the younger generation really bad advice, and I agree. I think this has come from a lot of employer branding saying this is a place you can be your authentic self. When in reality, I've never seen a place that says that actually happens. But
Right.
Danielle, interested to hear what your perspective is.
Super interesting conversation. I'm glad I let Joel go first. But I think that, I did see going to the employer branding thing that you were talking about. I just saw a post the other day about how you shouldn't be selling people on like this idea of your employer brand, right? Like you
Yeah.
don't build the brand and then expect that people will fall in line with that. You build the brand, employer brand, around the actual lived experience of people,
Yes.
and that lived experience isn't always going to be positive. So on that note, like I definitely agree about the employer brand thing. I do think, and this is something that I do teach college students and early career professionals, that what's important to highlight about yourself is, in my opinion, the thing that makes you you.
Yeah.
And so if you've gone through some sort of trauma, like let's just say, little t trauma over your life, like neurodiversity, right? Like that's something that is consistently going to show up for you, whether you're in school, whether you're at work. If you're
Yeah.
able to really learn lessons from that and to extract something that maybe can inspire other people, and you go to an organization and maybe like no one's really talking about neurodiversity. That's something where like you can harness your passion for being heard and your passion for contributing to something larger than yourself outside of your job, of course, right? Like we're not talking about just slacking on your job and talking about neurodiversity, but like that's something where you can actually contribute to the culture of an organization by talking about your lived experience and talking about how you overcome it and more talking about it in a positive way and being like, oh, are there other people who relate to this? And maybe that means starting an ERG that's dedicated to neurodiversity. Maybe that means, talking to other leaders who are, more outspoken about that part of themselves. But I think like the most important part is to really focus on like the positives of who you are and how you could help other people feel seen internally, and use that to, to grow your brand, to grow your voice, to build trust, to build relationships internally, and not necessarily to, isolate or make anyone else feel like smaller or less important and make yourself feel more important. But it's really more about like finding ways to connect with people on a personal level.
Really good points, Danielle. I agree with pretty much everything you said there. I think there is a line though. I think as far as like neurodiversity is a perfect example where I think you should share that. And I think this is why LinkedIn and there's different social media platforms that you should share your brand. When it comes to day to day of executing your job, if you're going over your trauma over and over again, people are like, "Hey, I've got my own stuff to deal with," right?
Yeah.
Like you get kind of sick of it. Like, can you do the job and execute so I can do my job is really what I care about most of the time. But I get where you're coming from, and I think we all are unique. We're not going to be robots. We're all going to come in with some weird quirks, but let's try to limit it a little bit. And I've seen it go the other way where it's just like I really don't want to know about that. I don't want to know about you getting drunk all weekend. I just don't care about that. Can you
Yeah.
execute on what we're trying to do? And it
Yeah.
might be where I'm at in my career and how old I am and what I've gone through
Oldie.
because I think in my 20s, I cared more about the social aspect of work than I did the actual work. I just want to get my work done and then spend time with my kids. I don't care
Yeah.
about the other stuff around it.
I think to your point too, it's interesting because I've dealt with, I've talked to friends where their managers have overshared with them, and where,
Yes.
and I've also heard the opposite, right? And I think it's important to realize, and I'm actually talking about this at 12:30 Eastern on the Gen Blend episode 5, where we're talking about whose problem is my mental health, because I think like it's really directly correlated, right? Bringing your full self to work, oftentimes, if you're not in a great mental place, then you're probably also going to bring some emotion with you,
Yeah.
and not everyone is ready to handle that. But I think it is important to know what oversharing is and looks like, and just be mindful of that. And I also think that one of the things that I've struggled with personally in my career, and that I'm definitely working on, is like what you going back to what Joel said earlier, like people didn't hire you for your opinion. They hired you to like do the job. And so in the past, where it's like I'm dealing with more like marketing stuff where we're marketing to my generation or we're marketing to people who I really understand and talk to every day, I think building the case for why my ideas are good ones is a skill that is not necessarily taught in school that you
No.
really need to learn. It's a critical skill. So proving like your idea, coming up with business cases, and learning how to pitch ideas is a huge, huge, huge skill, because otherwise it just falls on deaf ears, and you're not going to be heard and received in the way that you maybe want to be.
I think you nailed it. And by the way, the answer to your question about who owns your mental health is obviously yourself. It shouldn't be the organization's concept or control, but that's just my opinion on it. We'll see though, but I'll be tuning in.
I'll be
Awesome.
tuning in too. When is that? Where is that?
12:30 Eastern on LinkedIn Live.
Let's go LinkedIn
Fantastic.
live.
It's good to
Streaming all
see you
day.
guys. I do wanna say happy Thanksgiving, right? We
Happy
had ours, like,
Thanksgiving.
a month ago, so I'm glad to see you guys,
Oh.
and it's great being a Canadian working in the US because it's, like, 3 days that I can actually get work
Oh,
done because there's no one around. It's fantastic.